The gunshot that tore through Penelope's left shoulder in the summer of 1878 should have killed her. But somehow she survived the stagecoach robbery outside Twin Falls, Idaho, and lived to carry the scars as a permanent reminder of that day when everything changed. She pressed her palm against the rough wooden counter of the general store, trying to steady her breathing as Mrs. Henderson prattled on about the new shipment of fabric that had arrived from back east. Penelope nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere, fixed on the moment she would have to reach up to the high shelf and expose the twisted skin that ran from her shoulder down her left arm. The burns had come later, when the overturned stagecoach caught fire and she had dragged herself free. 6 months had passed since that terrible August afternoon, but the marks remained, angry and raised, a map of violence written on her flesh. "Miss Sterling, did you hear me?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through her thoughts. "I apologize. Could you repeat that?" Penelope forced a smile, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I asked if you needed help reaching those preserving jars on the top shelf." "No, thank you, I can manage." The words came out sharper than intended. Penelope softened her tone. "I have been practicing my reach." She stretched upward, feeling the fabric of her long-sleeved dress pull tight against the damaged skin. The scars protested with their usual dull ache, but she grasped the jar and brought it down. "Mrs." Henderson's eyes flickered to where Penelope's sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the mottled edge of scar tissue before she quickly tugged it back into place. The older woman's expression shifted to something between pity and discomfort, and Penelope wanted to disappear into the floorboards. "That will be all for today," Penelope said quickly, gathering her basket and coins. Outside, the February wind bit through her heavy wool coat. Twin Falls was growing, transforming from a rough frontier settlement into something resembling a proper town. The Snake River Canyon provided good land for farming, and more people arrived each month seeking opportunity in Idaho territory. Penelope had come here with her aunt 3 years ago after her parents died of fever in Ohio. At 22, she should have been married by now, settled with children perhaps, but the scars had changed everything. Men who had once shown interest now looked away. Women whispered behind gloved hands. She had become something to be pitied, damaged goods in a place where survival often depended on strength and wholeness. The boarding house where she lived with her aunt sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure that had seen better days. Her aunt ran it as a respectable establishment, housing miners, ranch hands, and the occasional traveling salesman. Penelope helped with cooking and cleaning, grateful for work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. She climbed the back stairs to avoid the main parlor where boarders sometimes gathered, not wanting to field questions or endure curious stares. In her small room, she finally allowed herself to remove the heavy dress. The scars ran from her left shoulder down past her elbow, a patchwork of burn marks and the ragged line where the bullet had torn through muscle. The doctors and boys had done what they could, but infection had set in during the long journey, and the burns had healed poorly. She traced the raised tissue with her fingertips, remembering the screams, the smell of smoke, the faces of the 2 other passengers who had not survived. Sometimes she wondered why she had been spared. For what purpose had she lived when others had died? A knock at her door startled her. "Penelope, dear, we have a new boarder arriving this evening. Could you help prepare the front room?" Her aunt's voice carried the perpetual weariness of a woman who had worked hard all her life. "Of course, Aunt Margaret. I will be down shortly." She dressed again, making sure every inch of scarred skin was covered, and descended to help ready the room. The boarding house had 6 rooms for rent, and they were usually full. This new arrival had sent word ahead, which was unusual. Most men simply showed up and asked for a bed. The advance notice suggested someone with means, perhaps education. Penelope swept the floor and changed the linens, placed fresh water in the pitcher, and made sure the lamp had enough oil. Evening fell quickly in February, the sky turning from pale blue to deep purple. Penelope was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the front door open and her aunt's greeting. A man's voice responded, deep and measured, with an accent that marked him as educated. She stirred the stew and tried not to listen, but voices carried in the old house. "Thank you for accommodating me, Mrs. Sterling. I expect to be in Twin Falls for several months." "You are most welcome, Mr. Sawyer. My niece has prepared your room. Supper will be ready within the hour." Penelope felt her stomach tighten. New people meant new questions, new stares, new moments of awkwardness when they noticed the scars. She ladled stew into bowls and sliced bread, arranging everything on the dining table. The other boarders trickled in, 3 ranch hands who worked at the Morrison spread south of town, and old Mr. Phillips who prospected for gold with more optimism than success. They took their usual seats, talking about the weather and the price of cattle. The new boarder entered last, and Penelope kept her eyes on the serving dishes as she brought out the final bowl. She caught only an impression of height, dark hair, and worn but quality clothing before she retreated toward the kitchen. "Miss, you have forgotten the butter," one of the ranch hands called. She turned back, reaching across the table for the butter dish. As she did, her sleeve caught on the edge of a bowl, yanking upward and exposing her forearm. The scarred skin gleamed in the lamplight. Silence fell across the table. Penelope jerked her arm back, clutching the sleeve down, her face burning hotter than the scars had ever felt. "I apologize," she whispered, and fled to the kitchen. Behind the closed door, she leaned against the wall and pressed her palms to her hot cheeks. Stupid, careless, exactly what she had tried so hard to avoid. Now they had all seen, and tomorrow the ranch hands would tell others, and the whispers would start again. A gentle knock made her straighten. "Yes." The door opened slowly, and the new boarder stood in the doorway. She could see him properly now in the brighter kitchen light. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with dark brown hair that touched his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with strong features and a slight shadow of beard. He wore a clean shirt and vest, but his hands were calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard. "I did not mean to startle you, Miss Sterling. I wanted to return this." He held out a spoon that must have fallen, and to introduce myself properly. "Zachary Sawyer." She took the spoon, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Penelope Sterling, thank you." He did not move to leave. His eyes were kind, not filled with the pity or disgust she had come to expect. "I also wanted to say that you have no reason to apologize for what happened in there. I should have been more careful, perhaps." He paused, then did something that shocked her. He rolled up his right sleeve to the elbow. His forearm bore a long, jagged scar that looked like it had once been a terrible wound. "Knife fight in Texas 4 years ago. Nearly bled out before the doctor could stitch it. And this." He turned slightly and pulled his collar aside to show the edge of what appeared to be a burn mark on his neck. "A branding iron, courtesy of some men who did not appreciate my testimony in a court case. I was 26 and working as a ranch foreman. They wanted to teach me about keeping quiet." Penelope stared at the scars, then at his face. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because scars are not something to hide in shame. They are proof that we survived. That we are stronger than whatever tried to destroy us." He rolled his sleeve back down with practiced ease. "I saw the fear in your eyes when your sleeve moved. I know that fear. I have felt it. But I learned something important over these past years. What is that? That the people worth knowing do not care about scars, and the people who do care are not worth knowing. He gave her a slight nod. Supper smells excellent, by the way. Your aunt mentioned you do most of the cooking. I enjoy it. It gives me purpose. Then I am fortunate to be staying here. He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. I hope we will have the chance to talk more, Miss Sterling. He left the kitchen, returning to the dining room. Penelope stood holding the spoon, her heart beating faster than it had in months. Someone understood. Someone knew the weight of carrying visible damage. She pressed her hand to her scarred shoulder and felt, for the first time since the attack, a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. The next morning, Penelope rose before dawn as usual and began preparing breakfast. The boarding house ran on routine, and she found comfort in the predictability of her tasks. Bacon sizzled in the pan, and she mixed batter for flapjacks, her movements efficient and practiced. Through the kitchen window, she could see the first hints of light touching the eastern sky. She heard footsteps on the stairs and expected one of the ranch hands, who often rose early to ride out to the Morrison place. Instead, Zachary Sawyer appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Good morning, Miss Sterling. I apologize for intruding in your workspace." "You are not intruding. Breakfast will be ready shortly." "I wondered if I might ask you about the area. I am here to work with several ranches on improving their horse stock, and I need to understand the local territory." He leaned against the doorframe, relaxed and comfortable. "Your aunt mentioned you have lived here for 3 years. Penelope flipped the flapjacks, considering her response. "I know the town well enough and some of the surrounding area. What specifically do you need to know?" "Which ranches are reputable, which trails are reliable this time of year, where I might purchase quality feed and tack." He paused. "And perhaps, if you are willing, you could tell me about the stagecoach route to Boys." Her hand froze over the pan. "Why would you want to know about that?" "Because you were on the stage that was attacked last summer, were you not? I heard about it when I was arranging to come here. 3 people killed, 1 survivor. The robbers were never caught." His voice was gentle but direct. "I am not asking out of morbid curiosity, Miss Sterling. I am asking because I think the robbery might be connected to some horse thefts I am investigating." She set down the spatula and turned to face him fully. "You are not just here to work with horses. I am here primarily for the horses, yes. I have built a reputation breeding and training quality stock, but I also do occasional work for ranchers' associations, tracking down thieves and solving problems." He met her eyes steadily. "The man who hired me lost 50 head of horses last fall. He thinks it is part of a larger operation, and he mentioned the stagecoach robbery as possibly related. I do not see how they could be connected. The stage was carrying a strong box with $8,000, payment for a large horse purchase. The buyer was my employer, William Harrison. The money was never recovered, and neither were the horses that were supposed to be delivered." Zachary stepped further into the kitchen, his expression serious. "I believe the robbers knew about both the money and the horses. Someone provided them with information." Penelope's mind raced back to that day. The stage had been running late, she remembered. There had been herself, a mining engineer named Peterson, a woman traveling to meet her husband, and the driver and guard. The attack had come at the narrow pass where the road curved sharply. Shots had rung out, the horses had panicked, and everything had dissolved into chaos and screaming and pain. "The driver and guard were killed immediately," she said slowly. "The mining engineer and the other woman died in the fire. I was shot and fell clear before the stage went over. I crawled into the rocks and hid until the robbers left. How many were there? 3 that I saw. They wore masks. One was tall, very tall and heavy. Another was slight, could have been a young man or even a woman in men's clothing. The third was average, nothing distinctive. She touched her shoulder unconsciously. They took the strongbox and left. They did not search carefully for survivors, or they would have found me. Would you recognize their voices? Perhaps. I am not certain. I was badly hurt and frightened. The memories pressed close, threatening to overwhelm her. She drew a breath and forced herself to remain calm. Why are you telling me this? Why not speak to the sheriff? I have spoken to Sheriff Turner. He is a good man but stretched thin. Twin Falls is growing fast and he has more problems than he can handle. He welcomed my help. Zachary's expression softened. I am telling you because you were there. You survived. And I think you are stronger than you believe yourself to be. You do not know me. No, but I know what it takes to carry scars like yours and still get up every morning. That requires strength. He gestured to the stove. Your flapjacks are burning. She whirled and rescued the breakfast, scolding herself for becoming distracted. But as she plated the food, she found herself thinking about his words. He saw strength where she saw only damage. He saw survival where she saw shame. The other boarders came down for breakfast, and the meal proceeded with the usual conversation about weather and work. Zachary ate with appreciation, complimenting the food and engaging easily with the ranch hands. Penelope watched him from the kitchen doorway and noticed how naturally he commanded attention without demanding it. The men respected him instinctively, responding to something in his manner that spoke of authority and competence. After breakfast, as she cleared the dishes, he approached her again. Miss Sterling, would you be willing to show me the town today? I need to visit the feed store and the farrier, and I would appreciate the guidance of someone who knows the area. Her first instinct was to refuse. Being seen walking through town with a man would invite speculation and gossip, but something in his steady gaze made her reconsider. He was offering her something, though she was not entirely sure what, perhaps normalcy. Perhaps the chance to be seen as something other than the scarred woman to be pitied. All right, I can spare a few hours this afternoon. Excellent. Shall we say 2 o'clock? She nodded, and he tipped his head politely before heading upstairs to his room. Penelope finished the dishes and tried to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. It had been months since she had spent time in the company of a man close to her own age, and she was not sure she remembered how to behave. At precisely 2 o'clock, Zachary appeared at the bottom of the stairs wearing a heavy coat and hat. Penelope had dressed in her warmest dress, and a coat that concealed her shape, her hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet. They stepped out into the cold February afternoon, the sky bright and cloudless. Twin Falls had grown considerably in the 3 years since Penelope had arrived. Main Street now boasted a proper mercantile. 2 saloons, a hotel, the sheriff's office, a church, and various other establishments. More buildings were under construction, including a new bank scheduled to open in the spring. The streets were muddy from recent snow melt, and they picked their way carefully along the wooden walkways. Tell me about the people here, Zachary said as they walked. Who are the leaders, the troublemakers, the ones to trust? Sheriff Turner, as you mentioned, is honest and works hard. The mayor, Benjamin Foster, owns the mercantile and is primarily interested in promoting growth. Reverend Matthews runs the church and is genuinely kind. She considered. The saloon owners, O'Brien and Donnelly, are rivals but mostly keep things peaceful. The doctor, Samuel Wright, is skilled but drinks too much since his wife died. And who would have known about the strongbox on the stage? Penelope had been expecting the question, but it still made her uncomfortable. The stage line office would have known. The company that was selling the horses. Mr. Harrison, your employer, his business associates, the bank in Boise that provided the money. She paused. And anyone those people might have told intentionally or otherwise. A wide circle, then. Zachary guided her around a particularly muddy patch. What about here in Twin Falls? Who has connections to Boise? Many people. The mercantile orders goods from there. The mining operations send ore there. The stage runs 3 times a week. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Mr. Sawyer, if you suspect someone specific, you should tell the sheriff. I do not suspect anyone yet. I am gathering information. His eyes scanned the street, taking in details. But I have learned that most crimes are not committed by strangers. They are committed by people who are part of the community, who know its rhythms and weaknesses. They continued to the feed store, where Zachary spoke at length with the owner about grain quality and pricing. Penelope stood back and observed, noticing how he asked questions that seemed casual but revealed information about who bought what and when. The owner, a talkative man named Jensen, was happy to share gossip and details about his customers. At the farrier's, Zachary examined horseshoes and discussed the specific needs of different breeds. The farrier, a quiet man named Tom who rarely spoke more than necessary, opened up under Zachary's knowledgeable questions. Penelope realized she was seeing a skilled investigator at work, someone who knew how to make people feel comfortable and valued while extracting useful information. As they walked back toward the boarding house, the afternoon light beginning to fade, Zachary said, "Thank you for accompanying me today. You have been very helpful." "I did very little. You provided exactly what I needed, someone who knows this place and its people, and whose company I find." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Refreshing. Refreshing is an unusual word, perhaps, but accurate. He stopped walking and faced her. "Miss Sterling, may I be direct with you? You have been direct since we met. Fair enough. Then let me be even more so. I find you intelligent, capable, and far stronger than you give yourself credit for. Your scars do not diminish you. If anything, they prove your resilience." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "I am not offering you pity or trying to flatter you. I am simply stating fact as I see it." Penelope did not know how to respond. No one had spoken to her this way since before the attack. She had become accustomed to being treated as fragile, damaged, someone to be handled carefully and not expected to contribute much beyond domestic duties. "Why do you care?" she finally asked. "You barely know me. Because I spent years hiding my own scars, both the ones you can see and the ones you cannot. I wore long sleeves in the heat of summer. I avoided situations where I might have to explain. I let those marks define me and limit me." His voice carried conviction. "And then I decided I was done being a victim. I chose to see my survival as strength rather than shame. It changed everything." "That is easier said than done." "It is. It took me a long time and a lot of failed attempts, but it was worth it." He resumed walking and she fell into step beside him. "I am not suggesting you need to change, Miss Sterling. You are handling your life as you see fit. I am simply offering my perspective as someone who has walked a similar path." They reached the boarding house as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Penelope paused at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Sawyer, and for sharing your experience. Zachary, please, and you are welcome," he smiled. "I hope we can do this again. I have more questions about the area and I suspect you have answers I need." "Perhaps." She allowed herself a small smile in return. "Good evening, Zachary." "Good evening, Penelope." The use of her first name sent a small shock through her, both presumptuous and intimate, but she did not correct him. Instead, she climbed the stairs and entered the house, her mind full of the afternoon's conversation and the unexpected connection she had felt with this man, who bore his own scars so openly. Over the following weeks, Zachary became a regular presence in Penelope's daily routine. He rose early and often joined her in the kitchen, drinking coffee and talking while she prepared breakfast. He asked her opinion on matters related to his investigation, treating her insights as valuable. He walked with her to the mercantile when she needed supplies, and he never seemed embarrassed or uncomfortable to be seen in her company. The other boarders grew accustomed to seeing them together. The ranch hands teased Zachary good-naturedly about his interest in Miss Penelope, but there was no malice in it. Aunt Margaret watched the developing friendship with cautious approval, hoping but not daring to push for anything more than companionship. Penelope found herself thinking about Zachary more than she wanted to admit. The way he listened when she spoke, truly listened rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. The competence in his hands as he worked with horses, gentle but firm. The kindness in his eyes when he looked at her, seeing her rather than just her scars. She had thought herself beyond such feelings, resigned to a life alone. But he was awakening something in her that she had believed dead. One evening in mid-March, as the weather began to warm and the first hints of spring appeared, Zachary asked if she would ride out with him the next day to visit one of the nearby ranches. Harrison's spread is about an hour north. He is expecting me, and I think you might enjoy seeing the horses. He has some of the finest stock in Idaho territory. I have not ridden in a long time, not since before. She trailed off. I have an excellent mare, very gentle and well trained. She will take care of you, he paused. Unless you would rather not. I do not want to push you into something that makes you uncomfortable. Penelope considered. Riding would mean a divided skirt or trousers, less coverage than she usually maintained. It would mean being away from the boarding house and town for several hours. It would mean trusting Zachary more than she had trusted anyone in months. But it would also mean freedom, movement, the chance to do something beyond cooking and cleaning. Yes, I will go with you. His face lit up with genuine pleasure. Excellent. We will leave at first light, before the day gets too warm. That night, Penelope found herself both excited and nervous. She dug through her trunk and found the divided skirt she had worn when she first came to Idaho, before the attack had made her afraid to be so visible. It was dusty but still fit, the dark blue fabric practical and sturdy. She laid out a warm shirt and her most comfortable boots. When she came down the next morning dressed for riding, Zachary was already in the kitchen, preparing 2 canteens of water and wrapping some bread and cheese for their lunch. He looked up and his eyes widened slightly. You look ready for adventure. I look practical. But she felt a flutter of pleasure at his reaction. They walked to the livery stable together, the streets still quiet in the early dawn. Zachary's horse was a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. The mare he had arranged for Penelope was a pretty gray with a white blaze, smaller and more delicate but sturdy enough. This is Rosie, Zachary said, stroking the mare's neck. She belonged to Harrison's daughter before she married and moved to California. She is the perfect lady's horse, patient and kind. Penelope approached slowly, letting Rosie sniff her hand. The mare's nose was soft as velvet. Hello, girl. Zachary held the mare steady while Penelope mounted, and she settled into the saddle with only a slight wince as her scarred shoulder protested. But the discomfort faded quickly, replaced by the familiar pleasure of being on horseback. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed riding. They set out north, following a well-worn trail that led along the Snake River. The morning was beautiful, cool but not cold, with a clear sky and the smell of sage and earth. Zachary kept the pace easy, letting the horses walk and occasionally trot but never pushing hard. He pointed out landmarks and talked about the land, clearly knowledgeable and observant. "You know this country well for someone who has only been here a few weeks," Penelope observed. "I study maps, and I pay attention. Part of my work is understanding terrain and how it affects animal behavior." He gestured to a line of cottonwoods marking a small creek. "Water sources, grazing land, shelter from weather. All of it matters when you are trying to find missing horses or track thieves. Have you found any leads on the thefts?" "Some. There is a pattern to them which suggests organization. The horses are taken in small groups, never more than 6 or 8 at a time, and always from remote pastures. No violence, no confrontation, just disappearance." He frowned. "That tells me the thieves know the land and the routines of the ranches. They strike when and where they are least likely to be noticed. And you think this is connected to the stage robbery? I think it is possible. The timing aligns. The stage was robbed in August. The horse thefts began in September and have continued through the winter." He glanced at her. "If the same group is responsible, they have been operating successfully for 7 months now. That takes planning and resources." They rode in silence for a while, and Penelope found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement. The sun rose higher, warming the air, and she loosened her coat. When she glanced down at her hands holding the reins, she could see the edge of scar tissue at her wrist where her sleeve had pulled back slightly. For once, it did not fill her with shame. Zachary had been right. These marks were proof of survival. Harrison's ranch came into view around mid-morning, a sprawling operation with a large barn, several corrals, and a house that spoke of prosperity. William Harrison himself came out to greet them, a big man in his 50s with graying hair and a firm handshake. "Sawyer, good to see you, and you must be Miss Sterling. Welcome to the Circle H." He had the booming voice of a man accustomed to being heard. "Come, let me show you the horses." Penelope had seen horses before, of course, but Harrison's stock was exceptional. Elegant bays and chestnuts, sturdy roans and pintos, each animal groomed and healthy. Zachary moved among them with expert ease, examining hooves and teeth, running his hands over legs and backs, asking detailed questions about bloodlines and temperament. "I think we can work together," Zachary finally said. "You have good foundation stock here. With some careful breeding choices, we can improve speed and stamina without sacrificing strength." "That is exactly what I want to hear," Harrison grinned. "Let us discuss details over lunch, Mrs. Harrison has prepared a meal." The ranch house was comfortable and welcoming, and Mrs. Harrison was a kind woman who immediately made Penelope feel at ease. Over roasted chicken and fresh bread, the conversation ranged from horses to weather to the growth of Twin Falls. Harrison asked Penelope about her aunt's boarding house, and she found herself talking more freely than she had in months, describing the daily rhythms and the various boarders. "You have a good head on your shoulders, Miss Sterling," Harrison said approvingly. "Sawyer here tells me you are helping him understand the town and its people." "I am simply answering questions." "She is being modest," Zachary said. "Her insights have been invaluable." After lunch, Harrison took them to see a special project, a young stallion he had purchased at considerable expense. The horse was magnificent, a black 3-year-old with fire in his eyes and power in every line of his body. "He is incredible," Penelope breathed. "What is his name?" "Midnight Thunder. I am hoping Sawyer can train him properly. He has spirit that needs direction, not breaking." Harrison leaned on the corral fence. A horse like this, properly trained, could establish a bloodline that would make Circle H famous across the West. Zachary studied the stallion with obvious interest. "May I work with him?" "That is why I hired you." Penelope watched as Zachary entered the corral, moving slowly and calmly. The stallion danced away, suspicious and alert. Zachary did not chase him, did not try to force interaction. Instead, he simply stood in the center of the space, waiting. Gradually, the horse's curiosity overcame his wariness. He approached in cautious steps, nostrils flaring as he caught Zachary's scent. When he was close enough, Zachary extended his hand slowly, letting the stallion sniff and investigate. "Patience," Harrison murmured beside Penelope. "That is what makes Sawyer special. He has the patience to let the horse come to him rather than forcing his will." They spent another hour at the ranch before beginning the ride back to Twin Falls. The sun was starting its descent, though they had plenty of daylight left. Penelope felt pleasantly tired, the good exhaustion that came from fresh air and exercise. Her shoulder ached a bit, but not unbearably. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said as they rode. "I enjoyed it more than I expected. I am glad. You seemed more relaxed there, more yourself." Zachary glanced at her. "You smiled several times. It was nice to see." "I have not had much reason to smile lately. Perhaps that will change." They rode for a while in comfortable silence before Penelope asked, "What made you decide to work with horses? It seems an unusual choice." "My father was a rancher in Montana. I grew up around horses, learning to ride before I could properly walk." His voice took on a distant quality, remembering. "When I was 18, my parents were killed by a band of raiders. They took everything, burned the ranch, scattered the stock. I was away buying supplies and came home to ruins. I am sorry. It was a long time ago, 12 years now." He adjusted his reins. "I spent several years after that drifting, doing odd jobs, getting into trouble. That is how I got these." He touched his scarred forearm. "I was angry and reckless and stupid. Eventually I realized I was destroying myself trying to outrun the pain." "What changed?" "An old cowboy named Hank took me on as a hand at a ranch in Texas. He saw something in me worth saving, though I do not know what. He taught me that horses are honest in a way people often are not. They respond to patience and kindness, and they do not care about your past or your scars. They only care about who you are in that moment." Zachary smiled slightly. "Working with them helped me heal. I found purpose again, and eventually I found peace." Penelope absorbed this, seeing him in a new light. He had lost everything and rebuilt himself. He understood grief and trauma not as abstract concepts but as lived experience. "I think I am still trying to find that peace," she admitted quietly. "You will. It takes time." He looked at her seriously. "And it helps to have people around you who see your strength instead of your wounds." "Is that what you see when you look at me?" "Yes, always." The simple certainty in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. She had spent so many months believing she was diminished, less than she had been, damaged beyond repair. But Zachary saw something different. And slowly, hesitantly, she was beginning to see it too. They reached Twin Falls as evening fell, returning the horses to the livery and walking back to the boarding house together. At the door, Zachary paused. "Penelope, would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening? The hotel has a dining room that is supposed to be quite good." Her heart jumped. "As in, a social engagement?" "Yes, as in courting, if you would permit me to court you." He met her eyes steadily. "I realize this might seem sudden, but I have never been one for games or pretense. I find you remarkable, and I would like the opportunity to spend more time with you beyond our daily conversations and practical excursions." She should say no. She should protect herself from inevitable disappointment. Men did not court scarred women, not seriously. But looking at Zachary's open, honest face, she could not bring herself to refuse. "Yes, I would like that." His smile was bright enough to rival the setting sun. "Excellent, I will call for you at 7. That night, Penelope lay in bed thinking about the day, about riding through the countryside, about watching Zachary work with the magnificent stallion, about his invitation to dinner. Aunt Margaret had noticed her good mood and asked gentle questions, clearly hoping that something positive was developing. Penelope had deflected but had not denied. She was not ready to examine her feelings too closely, afraid of what she might discover. The next day passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. She worked through her usual tasks but found her mind wandering constantly to the evening ahead. What should she wear? How should she style her hair? Would people in the dining room stare at them, whisper about the scarred woman dining with the handsome horse trainer by 6:30? She was dressed in her best gown, a deep green dress that she had not worn since before the attack. It was modest but flattering, and she had pinned her dark hair up in a style that was elegant without being fussy. The scars were still visible on her left hand and wrist, but she had stopped trying to hide them completely. Zachary would not care, and anyone else's opinion did not matter. When he knocked at precisely 7, she opened the door to find him dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt with a dark vest, his hair still damp from washing. He looked so handsome that her breath caught. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Absolutely beautiful. Thank you. You look very nice as well." They walked to the hotel through the evening streets, lit by lanterns and the last rays of daylight. Other people were out, and Penelope felt their glances, but Zachary walked beside her with such confidence and pride that she found herself standing a little straighter. He was not embarrassed or uncomfortable to be with her. He had chosen this, chosen her. The hotel dining room was indeed nice, with white tablecloths and proper china. They were seated near a window overlooking Main Street, and a waiter brought menus and water. Penelope scanned the offerings, impressed by the variety. Twin Falls was growing up, becoming civilized. They ordered beef steaks and potatoes, and as they waited for the food, they talked. Not about investigations or scars or trauma, but about simpler things. Zachary told her about places he had traveled, towns and territories she had only heard about. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and the life she had led before fever had taken them and left her dependent on her aunt's charity. "It is not charity," Zachary said firmly. "You work hard for your keep. Your aunt is fortunate to have you. She took me in when she did not have to. I am grateful. Gratitude is fine, but do not mistake it for debt. You have value beyond your usefulness." He reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, placed his hand over hers. The scarred skin and the unscarred joined together. "You have value simply because you exist, Penelope." She looked at their joined hands, at the visible marks they both carried. "How did you become so wise?" "Hard experience and a lot of mistakes." His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "I spent years believing I was worthless because of what had happened to me. When I finally understood that survival itself was an achievement, everything changed." The food arrived, interrupting the moment, and he released her hand. But the warmth of his touch lingered, and the look in his eyes promised more conversations, more moments, more connection. They ate and talked and laughed, and for the first time since the attack, Penelope felt truly alive. After dinner, they walked slowly back to the boarding house, neither wanting the evening to end. The spring night was cool but pleasant, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I have enjoyed this evening very much," Zachary said as they reached the boarding house steps. "As have I. Thank you for inviting me. Would you permit me to call on you again?" "Yes, I would like that very much." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his lips warm against her scarred skin. The gesture was both respectful and intimate, and it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Good night, Penelope. "Good night, Zachary." She went inside with her heart racing and her mind full of possibilities she had thought were lost forever. Through the window, she watched him walk away down the street, his stride confident and purposeful. Aunt Margaret appeared at her elbow, curiosity written all over her face. "Well," the older woman asked. He is wonderful," Penelope admitted, "and I am terrified." "Of what?" "Of hoping. Of believing this could be real." Aunt Margaret patted her arm gently. "My dear girl, sometimes we have to take the risk. Otherwise, we miss the blessings that are right in front of us." Over the following weeks, Zachary courted Penelope with steady determination. He took her on rides through the countryside, showing her the lands he was surveying for his investigation. He brought her small gifts, nothing extravagant but always thoughtful, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers from the hills, a particularly beautiful stone from the river. He sat with her in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of real friendship alongside the growing romantic attraction. The people of Twin Falls took notice. Gossip spread, as it always did in small towns, but the tone was more curious than cruel. Zachary Sawyer, the respected horse trainer and investigator, was courting Penelope Sterling, the quiet woman from the boarding house. Some expressed surprise that a man of his caliber would be interested in a scarred woman. But Zachary made it very clear through his actions that he considered himself fortunate, not charitable. For Penelope, the weeks felt like awakening from a long sleep. She had been merely existing, going through motions, but Zachary's presence in her life brought color and meaning back. She found herself laughing more, speaking more freely, even allowing herself to imagine a future beyond simple survival. In mid-April, Zachary's investigation took a significant turn. He had been following the pattern of horse thefts, mapping locations and timing, and he believed he had identified the area where the stolen horses were being held before being moved and sold. It was a remote canyon about 20 miles southeast of Twin Falls, difficult to access and easily defended. "I am going to scout it tomorrow," he told Penelope one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "If I am right, this could break the whole operation open. Will it be dangerous?" "Possibly. That is why I am bringing Sheriff Turner and 2 of his deputies. We will be careful." Fear clutched at her chest. "Zachary, these people killed 3 innocent passengers and nearly killed me. They will not hesitate to shoot if they feel threatened." "I know. That is why we will approach cautiously, observe first, and only act if we have clear advantage." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I will come back, Penelope. I promise you that. You cannot promise such things. Life is too uncertain. Perhaps. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to return to you, because I have something worth living for now." His gray-green eyes held hers. "I love you, Penelope Sterling. I have loved you since the first time I saw you, brave and frightened all at once, trying so hard to hide your pain. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and I would be a fool to let you go." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unexpected. "I love you too. I have tried to protect myself, but I cannot help it." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, releasing months of pent-up fear and grief and hope. He held her quietly, his hand stroking her back, offering comfort and strength. When she finally calmed, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I am sorry. I am being foolish." "You are being honest. That is never foolish." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "When I return from this scouting trip, I want to talk about our future, about marriage if you would consider it." Her heart soared and plummeted in the same instant. "Zachary, are you certain?" "I am not. I cannot." "You are everything I want and need. Your scars do not change that. If anything, they make me love you more because they show your courage." He cupped her face gently. "We have both survived terrible things. Now I want us to thrive together." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He kissed her forehead, gentle and tender, then rose to leave. "I will be back tomorrow evening or the morning after at the latest. Wait for me." "I will." She watched him walk away, then sat alone on the porch for a long time, thinking about his words. Marriage. A future. Things she had thought were impossible. But Zachary saw possibilities where she saw only obstacles. He believed in her strength even when she doubted it herself. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Penelope threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, baking more bread than they needed, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Aunt Margaret watched with knowing sympathy but did not press her to talk. The other boarders asked about Zachary's absence, and she explained he was working with Sheriff Turner on ranch business, which was true enough. Evening came with no sign of him. She told herself not to worry, that investigations took time. But as night fell and the house grew quiet, fear gnawed at her. What if something had gone wrong? What if the thieves had discovered them? What if Zachary was hurt or worse? She did not sleep that night, lying in her bed and listening to every sound, hoping to hear his footsteps on the stairs. When dawn came, gray and cold, she rose exhausted and anxious. She went to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast with shaking hands. Mid-morning, just as she was considering asking someone to ride out to the sheriff's office, the front door opened. She heard voices, Aunt Margaret's and another she knew as well as her own heartbeat. She ran to the front hall and found Zachary standing there, dusty and tired but whole. "You are back," she said, relief making her voice crack. "I promised I would be." He smiled, but there was tension around his eyes. "We found them. The horses, the operation, everything, and we found something else." Sheriff Turner stood behind him, his weathered face grim. "Miss Sterling, I hate to ask this, but we need your help. We have 3 suspects in custody, and we need you to identify their voices if you can." The blood drained from her face. "You want me to confront the men who attacked the stage?" "Not confront exactly. We will keep you separated. But if you can identify any of them as the robbers, it will strengthen our case considerably." The sheriff's tone was apologetic but firm. "I would not ask if it was not important." Penelope looked at Zachary and he nodded slightly. "I will be with you the entire time. You are safe, I promise." She drew a deep breath, calling on the strength he insisted she possessed. "All right. I will try." They walked to the sheriff's office together, Zachary's hand solid and steady on her back. The building was small but functional, with cells in the rear and an office in front. 3 men sat in separate cells, and Penelope could see them through the doorway. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Here is what we will do," Sheriff Turner said. "I will have each man speak in turn. You will listen from here where they cannot see you. If you recognize a voice, tell me. If you are not certain, that is fine too. I just need you to be honest." The first man was brought to stand near the cell door. He was tall and heavy, matching one of the figures from her memory. The sheriff asked him questions, his voice responding in a low rumble. Penelope listened carefully, trying to filter past the fear and focus on the sound. "I am not certain," she finally said. "It could be one of them, but I cannot swear to it." The second man was slight and young, and when he spoke, his voice was higher than she expected. She shook her head. "No. That is not right." The third man was brought forward, average height and build, nothing distinctive. The sheriff asked him where he had been on certain dates, and he answered with sullen defiance. "I do not have to tell you nothing. You have got no proof." The voice struck her like a physical blow. She gripped Zachary's arm, her nails digging in. "That is him, the one who gave orders. I remember that voice. "Are you certain?" Sheriff Turner asked. "Yes, I am certain. He told the others to take the strongbox and leave. He said they did not have time to waste on the dead." The memory was sharp and clear now, crystallized by the voice. He was the leader. The sheriff nodded grimly. "Thank you, Miss Sterling. That is very helpful." They left the office, and Penelope's legs were shaking so badly Zachary had to support her. They walked to a quiet spot behind the general store, and she leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "I remembered," she whispered. "I did not think I could, but I did. You were incredibly brave." Zachary held her close. "I know how hard that was. Will my identification be enough to convict them, combined with the stolen horses we found and the other evidence? Yes. The sheriff is confident." He pulled back to look at her. "This is over, Penelope. They will face justice, and you can begin to truly move forward. I would not have been able to do this without you, without knowing you believed in me. You had the strength all along, I just helped you see it." He touched her face gently. "Now let us go home. You need to rest." They returned to the boarding house, and Aunt Margaret immediately fussed over Penelope, making her sit down and drink tea. Zachary explained what had happened, and the older woman's eyes filled with tears. "My brave girl," she said, hugging Penelope tightly. "I am so proud of you." Penelope felt exhausted but also strangely light, as if a weight she had been carrying for months had finally been lifted. The men who had hurt her would be punished. She had faced them in a way and had not crumbled. She was still standing. That evening, after she had rested and eaten, Zachary asked her to walk with him. They went to the edge of town where the land opened up to rolling hills and distant mountains. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "I meant what I said yesterday about marriage," Zachary began. "I want to build a life with you, Penelope. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to face whatever challenges come together." "I want that too. But Zachary, you should know. My scars are not just outside. Sometimes I have nightmares. Sometimes I am afraid for no reason. I am not sure I am fully healed. None of us are fully healed. We all carry wounds, seen and unseen." He took both her hands. "I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for partnership, for honesty and trust and love. For the chance to build something good from the broken pieces. We have both survived," she said softly, remembering his words from weeks ago. "Yes, now we thrive," he smiled. "What do you say, Penelope Sterling? Will you marry me?" The answer rose from her heart, clear and certain. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her close and kissed her, and it was nothing like the gentle kiss on her hand from weeks before. This was deep and passionate, full of promise and desire and love. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man in Idaho territory." She laughed, the sound surprised and joyful. "I never thought I would feel this way again. Happy, hopeful. Get used to it. I intend to make you happy for the rest of our lives." They walked back to town as the stars emerged, making plans and talking about their future. They would marry in the church in Twin Falls, a simple ceremony with friends and neighbors. Zachary would continue his work with horses, and Penelope would help him build a breeding and training operation. Eventually, they would buy land and build a home, somewhere with good grazing and water, where they could raise horses and children and build something lasting. The wedding took place in late May, when the hills were green and wildflowers bloomed across the valley. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony in the small church, with Aunt Margaret and Sheriff Turner and the Harrisons, and most of the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that Aunt Margaret had helped her make, and Zachary wore his best suit. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought, Penelope's voice was steady and clear. I take you, Zachary Sawyer, as my husband, in strength and in weakness, in joy and in sorrow from this day forward. I take you, Penelope Sterling, as my wife. For all that you are and all that you will become, I pledge my love and my life." When the Reverend pronounced them married, Zachary kissed her with such tenderness that tears streamed down her face. The congregation applauded, and people called out congratulations. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Penelope felt a sense of rightness that she had never expected to know again. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Aunt Margaret and several town women providing food and drink. There was music and dancing, and Zachary led Penelope in a simple waltz despite her protests that she was not a good dancer. Her scarred arm rested in his hand, fully visible, and she no longer cared who saw. "You are beautiful," he whispered as they moved together. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen. You are biased, absolutely, and I have excellent taste." She laughed and let him spin her, feeling light and free. Later, as the party continued, William Harrison pulled Zachary aside for a conversation. Penelope watched from across the room and saw Zachary's face light up with surprise and pleasure. When he returned to her side, he was grinning. "Harrison just offered to sell me 50 acres adjacent to his ranch, at a price I can afford. Says he wants us nearby, wants to continue working together on the horse breeding program." Zachary's excitement was palpable. "We can build there, Penelope. We can have our home. Truly, truly. He is drawing up the papers this week." Penelope felt joy bubble up inside her. A home. Land of their own. A future that was real and tangible. She threw her arms around Zachary's neck and kissed him, not caring who was watching. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, in the finest room available. Zachary was gentle and patient, taking time to show her that her scars did not repel him, that every part of her was worthy of love and desire. When she tried to hide the worst of the marks, he stopped her. "Let me see you, all of you." His hands traced the scarred skin with reverence, not revulsion. "You are magnificent. Every part of you tells the story of your survival, your courage. I am honored to know you, to love you." His acceptance gave her permission to accept herself. In his arms, she finally understood that she was more than her wounds. She was strong and beautiful and deserving of love. They loved each other through the night, learning and exploring, building intimacy that was both physical and emotional. In the morning, wrapped in his arms with sunlight streaming through the window, Penelope felt a peace she had not known since before the attack. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me. For loving me. Thank you for letting me." He kissed her forehead. "We have a good life ahead of us, Mrs. Sawyer." "Yes, we do." They moved into a small house in town temporarily while construction began on their permanent home. Zachary worked long hours with Harrison's horses, developing breeding lines and training young stock. Penelope helped manage the business side, keeping records and handling correspondence. She discovered she had a talent for organization and numbers, and Zachary relied on her judgment. The trial of the stage robbers took place in June, and both Penelope and Zachary testified. The evidence was overwhelming between her identification, the recovered horses, and testimony from other victims. All 3 men were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. When the verdicts were read, Penelope felt the last chains of fear fall away. Justice had been served. She was truly free. By autumn, their house was finished. It was a solid 2-story structure with a large kitchen, a parlor with big windows overlooking the valley, and bedrooms upstairs. There was a barn for the horses and corrals for training. Zachary had built it to last, with strong foundations and quality materials, a home that would shelter them and the family they hoped to build. They moved in on a clear October day, carrying furniture and belongings across the threshold. That night, they sat on their front porch and watched the sun set over their land, their horses grazing peacefully in the near pasture. "Are you happy?" Zachary asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Penelope leaned against him, his arm solid around her shoulders. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real. Believe it. We built this together from pain and loss and survival. We took the worst moments of our lives and refused to let them define us." He kissed the top of her head. "I am so proud of you, Penelope, of everything you have overcome." "We overcame it together." "Yes, together. And together we will face whatever comes next." Winter arrived and they settled into the rhythms of married life. Zachary worked with the horses even in cold weather, and Penelope managed the house and the growing business correspondence. Word was spreading about Sawyer's training methods and quality stock, and inquiries came from across Idaho territory and beyond. On a snowy January evening, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited a few weeks to be certain, then told Zachary the news. His joy was immediate and overwhelming. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "A baby, we are going to have a baby, we are, in late summer, I think." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Are you well? Should you rest more? What do you need?" "I need you to stop panicking." She smiled at his anxious face. "I am fine. I am strong. We both know that. You are right. Of course you are right." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, still flat but carrying their child. "A baby, our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and spring. Penelope felt well aside from some early nausea, and she continued her work until she grew too large to move comfortably. Zachary fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate well and rested enough. Aunt Margaret visited often, excited to become a great aunt. On a hot August afternoon, almost exactly 2 years after the stagecoach attack, Penelope went into labor. Aunt Margaret and the midwife attended her while Zachary paced anxiously downstairs. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope feared she would not survive. But she had faced death before and refused to surrender. With a final enormous effort, she brought her son into the world. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Penelope's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she looked at her son, red and angry and perfect. "Hello, little one, hello." Zachary was brought up, and his expression when he saw his wife and child was one of pure wonder. "Penelope, he is beautiful. You are beautiful. We have a son. We have a son." He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months and finally settled on Thomas, after Zachary's father. Thomas Sawyer came into the world strong and healthy, with his father's gray-green eyes and a full head of dark hair. Zachary held him with such tenderness that Penelope's heart ached with love. "Thank you," Zachary whispered to her. "Thank you for this gift. For him, for you, for our life together. Thank you for showing me that I was worth loving, that my scars did not define me." He leaned down and kissed her gently. "We have both survived so much. Now look at what we have built. Look at our son. This is thriving, Penelope. This is what it looks like to move beyond survival into true life." She looked at her husband, at her baby, at the life they had created together from pain and loss and courage. He was right. They had survived the worst that life could throw at them, and they had not merely endured. They had built something beautiful and strong and lasting. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved horses as much as his father. When he was 3, a sister joined him, a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they called James. the house filled with the sounds of children and laughter and life. The horse breeding operation flourished. Sawyer stock became known throughout the West for quality and temperament. Ranchers came from hundreds of miles away to purchase horses and seek Zachary's training expertise. Penelope managed the business side with skill and efficiency, her organizational talents proving invaluable as the operation grew. Aunt Margaret lived to see all 3 grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 8 years old. She died knowing that Penelope was happy and secure, her final worry laid to rest. They buried her in the Twin Falls Cemetery, and Penelope mourned the woman who had given her refuge when she had nowhere else to go. The scars remained, of course. They faded somewhat with time but never disappeared. But Penelope had long since stopped seeing them as marks of shame. They were part of her story, proof of what she had survived and overcome. Her children grew up seeing their mother's scars as natural and normal, never understanding why anyone would think them ugly or shameful. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary took Penelope back to the spot outside Twin Falls where the stage had been attacked. It was the first time she had returned since that terrible day. They stood together looking at the place where her old life had ended and her new one had, unknowingly, begun. "I was so scared," she said quietly. "I thought I was going to die, and then when I survived I thought I would never have a real life again. You are one of the strongest people I have ever known. You survived not just the attack but the aftermath, the fear and shame and isolation." Zachary took her hand. "And you built a life that is rich and full and meaningful. We built it together. I could not have done it without you. I think you could have, but I am grateful I was there to walk beside you." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Penelope Sawyer. I loved you 10 years ago when I first saw you in that kitchen. I love you now even more, and I will love you until my last breath. I love you too. You saved me, Zachary, not from the attack, but from the prison I had built around myself afterward. You showed me that I was still whole, still valuable, still worthy of love." They stood together in that place of pain and transformation, and Penelope felt no fear, only gratitude. This was where her journey had begun, not the one that ended in darkness, but the one that led to light. They returned home to their children and their horses and their life. Thomas, now 13, was already showing talent with horse training. Sarah, 10 years old, had her mother's head for numbers and kept meticulous records of bloodlines and sales. James, 8, was still finding his way but showed promise as a rider. The house Zachary had built stood strong, weathering storms and seasons, sheltering the family within. In the evenings, they often gathered on the porch as the sun set over the valley, watching their horses graze and their children play. These were the moments Penelope treasured, the quiet instances of peace and contentment that she had once thought lost forever. "Are you happy?" Zachary would sometimes ask as he had on that first night in their home. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she would answer, and it was always true. The years continued to pass. The children grew into young adults. Thomas took over more of the horse training, working beside his father with natural skill and patience. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and stayed close, helping manage the expanded business operations. James discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and went east to study, returning with knowledge that improved their ability to care for the horses. When Penelope was 50, Zachary commissioned a family portrait from a traveling artist. They gathered for the sitting, 3 generations now including Sarah's 2 children. The artist captured them all, and Penelope asked that he not soften or hide her scars. They were part of her story, and she was no longer willing to pretend otherwise. The finished portrait showed a strong, handsome family. Penelope's scars were visible on her hand and neck, but they did not dominate the image. They were simply one element among many, no more defining than the color of her hair or the shape of her nose. When Zachary saw the finished work, he smiled with satisfaction. Perfect. It shows exactly who we are, strong, scarred, and still standing. They hung the portrait in the parlor, and it became a focal point of the house. Visitors would look at it and sometimes ask about Penelope's scars, and she would tell the story without shame or fear. She had survived a stagecoach attack and fire. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes. She had married a man who taught her that scars were marks of survival, not symbols of shame. "We have both survived," she would tell people, "and now we thrive." On their 20th anniversary, Zachary took her riding through the hills, just the two of them as they had done in those early days of courtship. They were older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines around their eyes, but the love between them had only deepened with time. They stopped at a high point overlooking their ranch. The house and barn spread out below, horses dotting the pastures, everything they had built together clearly visible. 20 years, Zachary said. 20 years since I first saw you and knew my life was about to change. You changed mine. You gave me back myself. No, you did that. I just reminded you of who you had always been." He dismounted and helped her down, holding her close. "I would do it all again, every moment, every challenge to end up here with you. Even the scars, especially the scars. They made us who we are. They taught us compassion and strength and resilience." He touched her face gently. "I love every part of you, Penelope. The smooth skin and the scarred, the strong moments and the weak, the joy and the pain. All of it together makes you the woman I love." She kissed him, there on the hilltop with the wind in their hair and their life spread out below them. "We have built something good. We have. And we are not done yet. There is more life to live, more joy to find, more challenges to face together." They stood together looking out over the land, two people who had survived terrible things and refused to let those experiences destroy them. They had taken their pain and transformed it into strength, their scars into symbols of resilience. They had chosen to thrive instead of merely survive, to build instead of merely endure. The sun set in brilliant colors across the western sky, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Penelope leaned against her husband's solid warmth and felt profound gratitude. Not gratitude for the suffering they had endured, but gratitude for the growth that had come from it. Gratitude for the love they had found, the family they had built, the life they shared. "I love you, Zachary Sawyer. With everything I am, everything I was, and everything I will be. I love you, Penelope Sawyer. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." They rode home together as the stars emerged, toward the lighted windows of their house and the family waiting within, toward the life they had built from broken pieces and refused to give up on, toward the future that stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. The scars remained on both of them, visible reminders of what they had survived, but they were no longer marks of shame or weakness. They were badges of honor, proof of resilience, symbols of the strength it takes not just to survive but to truly live. And in the end, that made all the difference.